The merciless Arizona sun blazed down upon Samuel Blackwood's weathered ranch, casting long shadows that seemed to mock his endless solitude. At 29, Rebecca Sterling had no husband to support her, and no father to control her decisions. She hadn't ridden into Copper Falls chasing marriage or security. She came chasing a challenge. When she heard about the widower with the unrideable stallion, a magnificent beast named Thunder that had thrown every man in the territory, she knew she'd found her purpose. What she didn't know was that taming Thunder wouldn't be the only wild thing she'd be gentling. Rebecca Sterling rode into town on a Tuesday morning when the sun was already cruel enough to make a rattlesnake seek shade. Her chestnut mare picked her way through the main street like she owned every inch of dusty ground. Rebecca wasn't much to look at by conventional standards, small-boned and wiry, but there was something in the way she sat her saddle that commanded attention. The first thing she noticed was the unnatural silence coming from the large corral behind Murphy's General Store. In a town where horses were currency and cowboys were royalty, that kind of quiet meant serious trouble. "You hear about the stallion?" The voice belonged to Frank Cooper, the town's blacksmith. Rebecca dismounted, her boots hitting the dusty ground with barely a whisper. "Depends on what you mean by about," she replied, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd faced down plenty of challenges. Frank's laugh was as rough as sandpaper on oak. "Lady, there ain't but one reason a rider comes to Copper Falls these days, and he's standing in that corral over yonder, just waiting to send another fool to meet his maker." She followed his gesture toward the large enclosure where a crowd had gathered. At the center of their attention stood a stallion that took her breath away. Thunder was black as a moonless night, his coat gleaming like polished obsidian in the harsh morning light. He stood 17 hands high, every muscle defined beneath that perfect hide, his neck arched in a way that spoke of royal bloodlines and untamed spirit. But it was his eyes that stopped her cold. Dark, intelligent, and filled with a grief so profound it seemed to echo in the very air around him. "Beautiful, ain't he?" Frank had followed her gaze. "And meaner than a stepped-on sidewinder. That there's Samuel Blackwood's prize stallion, or was his wife's, God rest her soul. Been near 3 years since Catherine passed, and that horse ain't let a soul on his back since." Rebecca studied the scene unfolding in the corral. A young cowboy was circling Thunder with a rope, his movements sharp and aggressive. The stallion's ears were pinned back, his nostrils flared, every line of his body screaming defiance. "Samuel's offering the ranch manager position to whoever can ride him," Frank continued. "Good pay, private quarters, and the respect that comes with running one of the biggest spreads in the territory. Problem is, Thunder's got other ideas about the whole arrangement." As if summoned by his name, the stallion suddenly reared, his front hooves striking out like weapons. The cowboy stumbled backward, lost his footing, and hit the dirt hard enough to send up a cloud that had the spectators coughing and laughing in equal measure. "Where's this Samuel?" she asked. Frank pointed toward a man standing apart from the crowd, his back straight as a fence post despite the weight that seemed to press down on his shoulders. Samuel Blackwood was tall and lean, with the kind of weathered face that spoke of years under an unforgiving sun. His dark hair was shot through with premature silver at the temples, and his eyes carried the same grief that haunted his stallion. Beside him stood a girl of about 11, her auburn hair braided neat as Sunday prayers, her small hand tucked trustingly into her father's larger one. The child's face held none of her father's shadows. Instead, she watched the proceedings with the bright curiosity of someone still young enough to believe in happy endings. "That's little Emma," Frank said, following her gaze. "Lost her mama when she was just 8. Birth went wrong, and they lost the baby too. Near broke Samuel's heart clean in half." Rebecca watched as another would-be cowboy approached Thunder, this one carrying what looked like a complicated contraption of ropes and pulleys. The stallion took one look at the device and charged, sending the man scrambling over the fence in a tangle of limbs and equipment that had the crowd roaring with laughter. "You think you could do better?" The challenge came from a voice smooth as silk, and Rebecca turned to find herself looking up into the face of a man who clearly thought very highly of himself. He was handsome, in the way that Eastern money could buy, perfectly groomed and expensively dressed. "Preston Hartwell," he said, extending a gloved hand. "I've come all the way from Boston to show these frontier cowboys how a real horseman handles a difficult mount." Rebecca looked at his offered hand, but didn't take it. "Rebecca Sterling, and I think that stallion's going to eat you alive." Preston's smile sharpened. "Miss Sterling, I've been breaking horses since before you were out of pigtails. I have equipment specially designed for difficult cases, methods based on the latest scientific principles." Preston gestured toward a wagon loaded with an impressive array of contraptions, mechanical restraints, elaborate bridles, devices that looked more suited to torture than training. Rebecca felt her jaw tighten. She'd seen men like Preston before, men who thought horses were machines to be operated rather than souls to be understood. Preston made quite a show of his preparations with his assistant, Gerald Swift. Together, they set up their apparatus with the precision of a military operation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Preston announced, "you're about to witness the triumph of human intelligence over animal instinct." Preston entered the corral with his restraint device, a complicated affair of pulleys and cables designed to immobilize the horse while the rider mounted. Thunder took one look at the contraption, and his ears flattened against his skull. What followed was less a demonstration of scientific horse training and more a lesson in the futility of trying to cage lightning. Thunder didn't just resist, he dismantled Preston's entire setup with systematic precision. First, he struck out with his front hooves, tangling the cable system beyond repair. When Gerald tried to approach with a backup device, Thunder wheeled and kicked, sending the man diving for cover. The stallion then proceeded to destroy every piece of equipment within reach, his actions deliberate and calculated. "Get me out of here," Preston shouted, scrambling over the fence rail with considerably less dignity than he'd entered. Thunder stood in the center of the destroyed equipment, his chest heaving, his eyes blazing with something that looked almost like satisfaction. For a moment, his gaze swept the crowd, dismissing each face with contempt. Then his eyes found Rebecca. She felt the impact of that look like a physical blow. There was intelligence there, and pain, and something else. A flicker of curiosity that made her breath catch in her throat. The moment stretched between them, woman and stallion, both outsiders in their own way, both carrying wounds that didn't show. The crowd began to disperse, their entertainment over for the day. Samuel gathered up his daughter and started toward the gate, his face expressionless. But Rebecca didn't move. She stood at the fence, watching Thunder as he settled into a far corner of the corral, his head high, his stance alert but no longer aggressive. He was beautiful in his defiance, magnificent in his grief. "You thinking about trying?" The voice belonged to Samuel himself, who had stopped beside her while his daughter ran ahead to pet a gentle mare in the next pen. Up close, she could see the lines that pain had carved around his eyes, the way his mouth seemed more familiar with sorrow than smiles. But there was strength there too, the kind that came from enduring what couldn't be changed and carrying on anyway. "Maybe," she said simply. He studied her with the careful attention of a man who'd learned not to take anything at face value. "Thunder isn't just any horse. He's special. Was my wife's from the time he was a colt. She had a way with him, understood him like nobody else ever will. When she died, something in him died too." Rebecca heard the pain in his voice, recognized it because she'd carried her own share. "Maybe he's not broken," she said quietly. "Maybe he's just waiting for someone to understand his grief." Samuel's head snapped toward her, something sharp and surprised flickering in his dark eyes. "Most people think grief is something to get over, move on from. Most people are fools." The simple statement hung between them, heavy with shared understanding. Samuel was quiet for a long moment. "The position pays well," he said finally. "Private quarters in the main house, respect of the crew, authority over ranch operations. But Thunder comes first. If you can't ride him, if he doesn't accept you, nothing else matters." Rebecca nodded, her eyes still on the stallion. "When can I try?" "Tomorrow morning, then. After the dew burns off. Thunder's always calmer in the morning." That evening, she walked back to the corral as the sun was setting. Thunder was still in his corner, but he lifted his head when she approached, his ears pricked forward with something that wasn't quite alertness but wasn't hostility either. "Hello, beautiful," she said softly, not approaching the fence but standing where he could see her clearly. "I know you're hurting, I know you miss her, but maybe we can find a way to help each other." The stallion watched her for a long moment, then took a single step forward. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was a beginning. Dawn came slow and pink over Copper Falls. Rebecca was up before the sun, her nerves steady but alert. She'd brought something with her, a small apple she'd saved from last night's dinner. It wasn't much of a peace offering, but it was honest, and she'd learned that horses valued honesty above all else. The crowd was already gathering when she reached the corral. Samuel stood apart from the others, his daughter Emma beside him. The child was practically vibrating with excitement, but her father's face was unreadable. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly as Rebecca approached. "No shame in walking away." Rebecca looked at him and saw the fear he was trying to hide. Not fear for his ranch or his position, but fear for her. "I know," she said simply, "but I'm going to anyway." She approached the corral gate slowly, her movements deliberate and non-threatening. The crowd fell silent, sensing that something different was about to unfold. "Easy, beautiful," she murmured as she stepped inside the enclosure. Thunder's ears flicked forward, but he didn't move away. "Just me and you now. No equipment, no tricks, no science, just truth." She stood just inside the gate, making no move to approach him directly. Instead, she pulled out the apple, took a small bite herself, and then held it out in her open palm. "I know you probably get tired of people trying to buy your friendship with treats," she said conversationally. "But this isn't about buying anything. This is just sharing something good with someone who might be hungry." She set the apple on the ground halfway between them and backed away, not toward the gate, but to the side, removing herself as an obstacle between Thunder and his escape route. Thunder studied the apple for a long moment, then looked at her. His ears were forward now, his posture curious rather than defensive. After what felt like an eternity, he took a single step toward the offering. The crowd held its collective breath as the stallion approached the apple, sniffed it carefully, and then ate it with delicate precision. When he finished, he looked at Rebecca again, and she could have sworn she saw something that looked almost like gratitude in his dark eyes. "That's just the beginning," she said softly, still making no move toward him. "I know you're tired of people trying to make you be something you're not. I know you're tired of them trying to take away your grief, like it's something to be ashamed of. But grief isn't shame, is it? Grief is love with nowhere to go." The stallion's ears flickered at her words, as if he understood not just the tone but the meaning. Rebecca took a single step sideways, not closer but parallel, like a dance partner finding her rhythm. "She was special, wasn't she?" Rebecca continued, her voice carrying easily in the morning stillness. "You're Catherine. She understood you in ways nobody else did. Probably talked to you like you were a person, not just a horse." Thunder's head lowered slightly, and for a moment, Rebecca could have sworn she saw the weight of his grief settle over him like a visible shroud. "I know what it's like to lose someone who understood you," she went on, her own voice growing softer. "But here's the thing about love, beautiful. Real love doesn't die just because the person does. It changes, transforms into something else. And maybe, just maybe, it can find a way to love again, differently, but no less truly." Thunder took a step toward her, then another. His movements were cautious but not fearful, curious rather than aggressive. When he was close enough, he stretched out his neck and gently touched her outstretched hand with his muzzle. The contact was electric, a connection that transcended species and spoke to something deeper than words. Rebecca felt tears she hadn't expected prick at her eyes as the stallion's warm breath ghosted over her skin. "That's it," she whispered. "That's all I wanted, just to say hello properly." She made no move to grab him, no attempt to put a rope around his neck or slip a bridle over his head. Instead, she simply stood there, letting him explore her scent, her presence, her intentions. "I'm not trying to replace her," she said, addressing both the horse and the part of herself that understood his loss. "Nobody could do that. But maybe we don't need to replace what we've lost. Maybe We just need to find room for what we might gain. She began to move again, not in a straight line toward him, but in a gentle arc, like water finding its way around a stone. Thunder watched her with growing interest. When she was perpendicular to his shoulder, she stopped. "I'm going to try something now," she said. "If you don't like it, just walk away. No pressure, no force, no tricks, just an invitation." Slowly, carefully, she reached out and placed her hand on his neck, just behind his ear. His skin was warm and smooth, his muscles powerful beneath her palm. For a moment he tensed, and she thought he might pull away. But then he relaxed, leaning slightly into her touch. The crowd was so quiet they might have been carved from stone. Even the wind seemed to have stilled, as if the whole world was holding its breath. Rebecca began to stroke his neck in slow, gentle circles, her touch light but confident. Thunder's eyes drifted half-closed, and she could hear him breathing deeply, some tension she hadn't even realized he was carrying beginning to leave his body. "You're magnificent," she told him, meaning every word. "Strong and proud and loyal. Catherine was lucky to have you, and you were lucky to have her. That kind of love doesn't come along often." She continued stroking his neck, gradually extending her reach to his shoulder, his back, his flank. Each new touch was preceded by a pause, an opportunity for him to object or move away. He never did. When she felt him fully relaxed under her hands, she took the next step, placing both palms flat against his side and applying gentle pressure. Thunder shifted slightly but didn't move away. "I'm going to try to get on your back now," she said quietly. "Not to dominate you or show you who's boss, just to see if we can trust each other enough to share the same space." Moving with infinite care, she gathered a handful of his mane and slowly, gradually pulled herself up onto his back. Thunder stood perfectly still, his muscles tense but not resistant, as if he was making a conscious choice to allow this intimacy. Rebecca settled herself carefully, her seat light and balanced, her hands gentle on his neck. For a long moment, they simply stood there, woman and stallion, grief and understanding, the beginning of something that might, with time and patience, become trust. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for letting me in." Thunder turned his head slightly, as if to look at her, and then, without any urging from her, he began to walk. Not the explosive, violent movement the crowd had expected, but a calm, measured pace around the corral, as if he was showing her off to the assembled watchers. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, but Rebecca barely heard them. She was lost in the rhythm of Thunder's movement, the feel of his powerful muscles beneath her, the sense of partnership that was already beginning to bloom between them. When Thunder finally stopped, she slid down from his back and stood beside him, her hand resting on his neck. He lowered his head and gently nuzzled her shoulder, a gesture of acceptance that brought tears to her eyes. Samuel was the first to reach them, his face a mixture of amazement and something that looked like hope. "I've never seen anything like that," he said quietly. "In 3 years, he's never let anyone close enough to touch him, let alone ride him." "He's been waiting," Rebecca said simply. Waiting for someone who understood that his grief wasn't something to be conquered, but something to be honored. Emma had ducked under the fence rails and was approaching cautiously, her eyes wide with wonder. "Can I pet him?" she asked. Rebecca looked at Thunder, who was watching the child with gentle eyes. "I think he'd like that," she said. As Emma's small hand touched Thunder's muzzle, Rebecca felt something shift inside her chest, a sense of rightness, of belonging, that she'd never experienced before. Samuel was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "The job is yours," he said finally, "if you want it." Rebecca looked around at the faces surrounding her. Samuel's cautious hope, Emma's bright excitement, Thunder's quiet acceptance. "I want it," she said simply. "I want all of it." The weeks that followed were a revelation. Rebecca threw herself into her new role as ranch manager with the same patience and understanding she'd shown Thunder. But it was her growing relationship with Samuel and Emma that truly transformed her life. Emma, starved for feminine guidance, blossomed under Rebecca's gentle tutelage. Samuel proved to be a different kind of challenge. Where Thunder had been openly grieving, Samuel had buried his pain so deep that it had become part of his foundation. He was unfailingly polite, professionally respectful, and emotionally distant. The breakthrough came on an evening in late autumn. Rebecca had been working late when she heard piano music drifting from the main house. She followed the melody to find Samuel at an old, upright piano, his fingers moving over the keys with surprising grace. The song was hauntingly beautiful, filled with longing and loss. When he finished, he sat in silence before becoming aware of her presence. "Don't stop," Rebecca said softly. "It was beautiful. Did Catherine play?" Samuel's hands stilled on the keys. She loved music. This was her favorite song. He paused, then added quietly, "I haven't played it since she died." "Why tonight?" He looked up at her, and for the first time since she'd known him, his careful mask slipped completely. "Because for the first time in 3 years, this house feels like a home again. Because Emma is laughing and learning. Because you've brought life back to a place that was dying." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Rebecca felt her heart racing as she recognized the shift in his tone, the way his eyes had softened as they looked at her. The crisis came in December, when a harsh winter storm trapped them all in the house for 3 days. On the second day, Emma developed a fever. It started as a simple cold but quickly worsened, leaving her burning with heat and shivering with chills. "She's so hot," Samuel said, his voice tight with fear. "What if it's something serious? What if we can't get her to a doctor in time?" Rebecca saw the panic in his eyes, the terrible memories of another woman he'd been unable to save. "She's going to be fine," she said firmly. But as the hours passed and Emma's fever climbed higher, Rebecca began to worry too. Samuel paced the room like a caged animal, his face haggard with exhaustion and fear. "I can't lose her too," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I can't survive losing her too." Rebecca caught his hands, stilling his restless movement. "You won't lose her," she said fiercely. "I won't let that happen. We won't let that happen." Something in her voice seemed to reach him. He looked down at their joined hands, then up at her face, and she saw the moment when his careful control finally crumbled. "I'm scared," he admitted, the words torn from somewhere deep inside him. "You don't have to do anything alone," Rebecca said softly. "That's what families do. They face things together." The word family seemed to hit him like a physical blow. His eyes searched her face. "Is that what we are?" he asked quietly. "A family?" "I'd like to be," she whispered, "if you'll have me." Instead of answering with words, he pulled her into his arms, holding her with desperate intensity. They held each other in the lamplight, two people who had found their way through grief to something that might, with time and courage, become love. Emma's fever broke just before dawn on the third day. She woke asking for water and complaining that she was hungry, the most beautiful sounds Rebecca had ever heard. That evening, after Emma had been tucked into bed, Samuel found Rebecca on the front porch, watching the stars emerge in the clear winter sky. "Cold night," he said, settling into the chair beside her. "Beautiful, though," she replied. "Sometimes the most beautiful things come after the worst storms." He was quiet for a moment, then reached for her hand. "Rebecca, I need to tell you something. These past months, watching you with Emma, working beside you, seeing the way you've brought life back to this place, I've fallen in love with you." The words she'd been hoping to hear sent warmth flooding through her chest. "I love you too," she said simply. "Will you marry me, Rebecca? Will you be my wife and Emma's mother and my partner in everything?" The proposal was everything she'd dreamed of. Simple, honest, born of shared experience rather than grand gestures. "Yes," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes to all of it." The kiss that followed was full of promise and possibility. When they finally broke apart, they found Emma standing in the doorway, her nightgown white in the starlight, her face glowing with happiness. "I heard," she said, running to throw her arms around both of them. "Does this mean Rebecca will really be my mama now?" "If you'll have me, sweetheart," Rebecca said, kneeling to the child's level. "I know I can't replace your birth mother, but I promise to love you and take care of you always." "I've been praying for a new mama," Emma said solemnly, "and God sent me you." The wedding was held in the spring, when the desert bloomed with wildflowers and the air was sweet with the promise of new beginnings. But the most memorable moment wasn't when they exchanged vows. It was when thunder, decorated with ribbons and flowers, carried all three of them from the church to the ranch for the reception. The stallion moved with regal dignity, as if he understood the significance of the moment. This was his family now, complete and whole, ready to face whatever the future might bring. As the sun set over the Blackwood Ranch, the three of them rode thunder out into the open pasture. Rebecca leaned back against her husband's strong chest, Emma secure in her arms, and felt the stallion's powerful muscles moving beneath them. This was home. Not a place, but a feeling. Not a destination, but a journey shared with the people you love. Thunder tossed his head and whinnied, a sound of pure joy that echoed across the open range. Behind them, the ranch house glowed with welcoming light, a beacon of hope in the vast wilderness. And in that moment, Rebecca knew with absolute certainty that she had found what she'd been searching for all her life without knowing it. A place to belong, a family to cherish, and a love strong enough to last forever. The taming was complete, but it hadn't been about conquest or dominance. It had been about trust and respect, grief and healing, the recognition that sometimes the wildest hearts make the truest partners. As they rode toward home under a canopy of stars, Rebecca smiled and whispered a prayer of gratitude to whatever force had brought them all together. Woman, man, child, and the magnificent stallion who had taught them all what it meant to love again.